Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
Today is June 22nd, 2006. We're here in Bloomington, Minnesota, and we're with Jim Kirihara. And on camera is Don Yamagami, on audio, Suna Hoover, and I'm Joanne Lavich. And again, Jim, thank you for joining us this morning and allowing us to interview you. Can we please start off with, you're just giving me your full name and telling me when you were born and where you were born.
Well, Jim is a given name by my teacher, I understand, in grammar school. My birth certificate name legally is Kwanichi. My dad must have, he was born in the late 1800s, so I ended up with a different kind of a name, and I never went by that name. So I ended up with Jim. I was born in 1925 in Oakland, California. And I still remember that there was a Mrs. Hota that was the midwife, and we just married Mrs. Hota's second son in Minneapolis last year.
Oh, how remarkable.
It's for some reason, the reason she ended up here with her son is that her oldest son was in MIS and settled in Berkeley with his family, but she died here. But her name is on my birth certificate from Oakland.
So you grew up in Oakland?
Right, I went to high school, and
well, before we go into that, could you tell me a little bit about your parents? Do you?
Yes, my parents are from the bottom of Kyushu. I remember it vividly because I was in Japan in 1935 with my brother.
And what were their names? Your parents' names?
They were both Kirihara because they were related.
Oh.
I had two grandfathers that were brothers, and I met them in 1935. And Kyushu is a different country from Japan proper, you know, because there's a lot of history in Kyushu. And I like to think of myself as a historian, so I've read about what's happening or what has happened.
Okay, so your parents knew each other in Kyushu.
Well, I had a grandfather that was in this country in the early 1900s. He came by himself, even though he was married. And he told me in 1935 that he lived in Richmond, working for the railroads. And he was not a timid soul, and I think he must have got tired of the discrimination, and he went back to Japan and talked my father into coming out here in the early 1900s. And somehow he married his cousin, and she came over here on the last boat in 1924.
So
right.
did they come together?
Pardon me?
Did they come together, or did your
No, they
father come first and then she
my grandfather came first, and then my father was called by his future father-in-law, and he worked in California in farms in Napa Valley, and then he must have gone to Japan, and they got married, and finally my mother came over in 1924 when the exclusion occurred.
Oh.
The Japanese could not come to the States, and they, through history, the Chinese were the first to be excluded because they wanted to stop the Chinese from coming, and the Japanese finally were excluded in 1924. That's how my mother got here.
Oh.
And of course, the picture brides were another story.
So tell me a little bit more about how you remember your parents. What were they like?
Well, they tried a lot of things. My father was a farmer, of course, and made a lot of friends in Suisun and the Napa Valley. And he relocated to Oakland when they got married. And I recall in my childhood that my mother opened up, you know, they're self-employed, and she started a dry cleaning business, and my father was a shoe repairer. So they had two businesses in one location. And then nearby there was a Issei couple that were elderly, and they had a small grocery store. And my parents bought that grocery store.
So was
held
this,
that until evacuation.
well, no, so this, oops. Okay, we'll take a little break.
Rolling.
Okay, well, we changed the light bulb, so we're okay again. You were talking about your parents,
Right.
and you said that your mother had a dry cleaning business,
Right,
and
she
your
did
father
alterations.
was... Oh,
You know, she was good at repairing clothes and tailoring. She went to tailoring. You know, a lot of Japanese, at least in Oakland. I remember the Issei ladies went to, besides English classes, not much in English classes, but they tried to learn a practical trade, and I've got pictures at home where maybe 15, 20 ladies were attending a tailoring school. And one fact that is vivid with me is a lady by the name of Mrs. Suzuki. Turned out her son was Goro Suzuki. I don't know if you know him or heard of him, but he was older than our age, and he was a nightclub entertainer by the name of Jack Sue. And he was on TV. I'm
Yes.
sure you folks, younger people, would remember him on Barney
Miller.
Barney Miller. He was a real deadpan actor, and I knew Goro. You know, his name was Goro Suzuki, but he had to change it to a Chinese name because it's not acceptable for Japanese entertainment in America at the time. And I still remember the Tan Foran days when he was an MC and a singer, and
Wow.
he became pretty famous.
Yes.
He was in Flower Drum Song, and Miyoshi Umeki, and
Yes,
he was a pretty good actor.
Mm-hmm.
But his mother was I'm talking about in the late 20s, or, it must have been the late 20s, or in the mid 20s that she had a school and taught the Isseis how to sew, and that's how my mother got started in the tailoring and the alteration business. And that was her first job in 1944 here.
Did she ever sew clothes for the
Oh,
family?
yeah, that's
also?
right. Yeah, there was even a Mr. Kusunoki in the Twin Cities that was a high school economics teacher. He was a tailor, and he's originally from San Francisco, and he taught high school to the girls in home economics in Topaz. And he ended up here, and his son, one of the sons, is still here.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
But
then,
that's how my mother became proficient in making a living besides the grocery store.
so were these businesses in Oakland?
Right, Oakland, California. It's right, right pretty close to the downtown area. If you know anything about Oakland, there's a bus station and city hall downtown, and we were walking distance from a lake, Lake Merritt. Still remember those days. Go smelt fishing.
So your father, during this time, had the shoe repair business?
And well, until they bought the grocery
until
store.
the grocery
Right.
store.
And then they both worked at the grocery store. And I don't understand how they accumulated money running a grocery store, but we were pretty lucky that we were able to travel before the war in a depression.
Did your mother continue to run the dry cleaning business?
No, when they bought the grocery store, they had to be full-time grocery. My dad had to go to the market every day, to the wholesale market, and buy produce. But that is vivid in my mind that most East States had to have self-employment. You know, you don't quite understand. You know, it's hard to understand how they made a living in those days. Some people had to be domestics and gardeners, and that's one of the reasons I made up my mind I was not going back to the West Coast. And
Now, did you have any siblings, any brothers or
yes,
sisters?
I had one brother 4 years younger than myself, and he was able to travel too. He went to Japan with my mother and I in 1935 when he was 6 years old. I was 10. And before the war, it was my father's turn, and I remember working in the grocery store and driving a truck at 15, 16. And my mother had to run the grocery store with young Nisei ladies' help. She stayed over from Suisun, Napa Valley. It was in the late 30s. So like I say, I to this day I cannot understand how they accumulated money to go to a foreign country in the deepest depression.
So you said you went to Japan with your mother?
Yes, my brother and I.
How old were you?
10 years old, 1935. And I believe it must have been several months. It wasn't a 1 month stay or anything like that, because I stayed with uncles, and my brother had to travel with my mother, and we did a lot of sightseeing.
So your parents kept in contact with the relatives
Oh,
in
yeah.
Japan the whole
That's
time?
right.
So did you just visit Kyushu, or?
Yeah, well, not only Kyushu, but I remember Nikko and Kyoto,
Wow.
Tokyo, Yokohama. I still remember those days, you know, and
What impressed you about your grandparents when you met them?
They were simple farm people, you know, except that one maternal grandfather was different in that he was pretty young when he came to the States, and he started 2 families. I guess it's a rarity, but he must have divorced his first wife, who was my mother's parent. But I even met my mother's parents, and that was another boat ride, and south of Kyushu in the islands, on the way to, at the time, they called it Ryukyu Island or something down there, south of Kagoshima. Took a boat to get there.
So I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused. I know that I believe it was your maternal grandfather
Right.
went
He was
to,
the one that
to
was
the
here.
United States.
Right.
Now, did he stay in the United States or did he go back?
No, he
to
went
Japan?
back.
Oh,
That's when I
okay.
saw
Yes,
him
and
in
that's when
35.
where you met.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
when I got the conversation. And he started a second family, 2 boys and a girl.
Was he a stern man?
Oh yeah, he was pretty stern.
Oh.
he didn't want to. He was pretty stern. He was not a mild man, and I'm sure he had difficulties accepting this discrimination in this country.
Is that?
Because
Do you think that's why he returned to Japan?
oh yeah, he saved his money, went back, and so he was considered a rich man in Japan. Had a brand new house. Sorry.
Would you like another sip of
Oh,
water?
I'm fine.
Okay. So did he continue farming again when he moved back
I
to
believe so. And he had 2 sons and a daughter in the second family, like my aunt and uncle, and there's just one aunt remaining in Kagoshima. I recall her when she was a young girl. They visited the U.S. too, so they know something about the U.S. In fact, we took them to Washington, D.C. one year when they came.
How nice. So when you first went to Japan at the age of 10, what impressed you about it? What was your first impression about it?
It's pretty. There's a big contrast with Tokyo and Kyoto. There's 2 different kinds of cities, and it's just the beauty is pretty hard to forget. Japanese do things with their trees. They take care of their trees. They just don't let them grow. But there's a lot of people in a small area. But I was a kid, so it was a carefree life, and I was on spent my time in a place called Kushikino on the Korean side of Kyushu, and it was right on the ocean there, not the Pacific, but the Korean side, and right on the bottom of Japan.
Now, I imagine you were speaking Japanese to your
Well,
parents
yes,
all
we
the
had
time,
to.
so
Right.
you didn't have any problems communicating?
No,
when you went?
not much. Then we went to Japanese school, so, but I cannot write anything anymore. Just no usage. Just forget.
I wanted to ask you about the voyage that coming over
Yeah, it's a big boat.
from United States to Japan, and
Yeah, I remember stopping off in Hawaii, because they all such a long voyage that I still remember docking in Honolulu, in muddy waters, because the prop turned to dirt in the harbor. And I still remember the Hawaiian kids looking for coins to be thrown from the boat, and they'd dive after the coins. I remember that pretty well. I don't recall getting off the ship, but I definitely remember the divers, and you throw coins overboard, and they can see the stuff going down, and they go after the coins in those days.
From the harbor, could you see the lush greenery on
Oh,
the
yeah.
island?
Oh, sure.
Did that so did that impress you as being this is a very tropical, very different
Right. It was
environment?
warm. Yeah, it's a tropical island. I've been to Hawaii more than once, so.
Did you get seasick?
No, I can't recall getting seasick. Some people did, you know.
So
Because-
when you went over, were you in one of the cabins down below?
No, it was
or-
it was one of the cheaper voyages. You know, you don't have your own cabin. I don't think it's kind of a group. I recall a group setting. You know, in those days, I know they had first and second class and so on, but we were not that rich.
Were you able to go above on the deck
Oh,
though
yeah.
during the
I
day
recall,
and get fresh air and
You know, the boats are so huge, and you look over the side while you're going, and you see the fish, you know, the flying fish. You know, I recall that. And it's pretty monotonous because you don't see any land. You just keep on going, except when you get to Hawaii, and the next stop is Yokohama. I can't remember if it was 10 days or 2 weeks, but it's a long voyage. It was a long voyage in 1935.
do you remember the food on the boat at all? Was it?
No, not much.
Okay, probably pretty forgettable,
You
huh?
know, and sure.
Oh, speaking of food, when you got to Japan and you were eating there, did the food impress you as being
Well,
different or
pretty basic, you know. I remember in those days they mixed sweet potatoes in the rice to make the rice go further, you know. And they probably mix oats in there too. I recall that kind of food. And probably they even furnished us with milk, which was amazing. I think about it, you know. They figured that we needed milk, and I remember small half pints of milk that people would deliver in the country, and it was kind of warm. But they went out of their way, and I remember tofu. Raw tofu. That was our favorite foods. So everything was pretty basic. But I still remember meeting a lot of people. You know, it was unusual for visitors to Japan in those days. But,
so they were very curious about you?
oh yeah, they're curious, and I remember we must have looked different to the younger people. They couldn't figure out why we were not in school, and our haircuts must have been different. And they knew we were different. I'm talking about it in other cities, but it was a good experience.
Were there any relatives in particular that you remember
Oh, yeah,
during
I
that
had
trip?
my father's youngest brother was almost like my father in appearance, and he took me under his wing, and my uncles treated me pretty well. They had a large family, you know, the aunts and uncles and their kids, and so my recent visit was in the late 90s, and there's people that still remember me going back to 1935.
Wow. Were there any aunts or uncles or any of your grandparents that were what you would consider characters? I mean, they had little eccentric personalities or anything?
No, they're pretty
particular?
normal. Yeah, I can't. All I remember is while growing up, the Japanese relatives were always asking for help. You know, they wanted monetary help from my parents, and I didn't know too much about the finances, but they tried to help. you know, especially after the war, because one uncle that I recall that was in the Army in 1935. He's one of the younger uncles to my father. Was always in need of help, and you know they'd ask for money, and they wanted to buy a horse, and they wanted to start a taxi service in Japan. They called it basha, but I recall my parents talking about trying to send help to Japan. Pardon me.
Would you like another sip of water?
Yeah, okay. I'll help.
So was that the only trip that you took to Japan as a child?
Yes, that was the only one that I recall. My parents liked to go to different places. I remember going to Yosemite and Los Angeles by car in those days.
Oh, wow.
Those are the long trips. You know. I don't know how they did it, but my dad liked to go to different places, Monterey, and he liked nature.
Boy, the roads at that time.
Oh yeah, 2-lane highways.
Kind of made it for an exciting trip, actually, huh?
I even recall when I was able to drive, going to Gilroy. I don't know if you ever heard of Gilroy, but in those days, before the war, I recall going to Gilroy Hot Springs. I heard it's a garlic capital now. And I remember going up to the Russian River, you know, past Napa Valley for vacations. So.
Did you go camping?
Well, I was in the Boy Scouts too. I recall something like that.
Well, when you said go on vacation, I think of those family vacations back at that time was kind of more like camping. Or did you actually stay in like motels or?
I can't recall how we stayed, but Gilroy definitely we stayed at the hot springs, you know, facilities. 'Cause I remember swimming in the pool in Gilroy. We went more than once. We did go on vacations, and then with a business, you know, it's one or the other parent has to go, so they never went together.
Oh, yeah. So it wasn't the family vacation with the two
well,
parents?
they didn't want to close the store, I guess.
Oh. So what, usually you would go with your mother and
something like
your
that.
Father would take your younger brother?
Yeah, that's what he did when he went to Japan.
Tell me about your school.
Well, I went to a grammar school in the neighborhood and junior high, and then I ended up at a place called Oakland Technical High School. The only thing that was unusual about that is Jim Pollard was a Stanford, well, he was a basketball player at Oakland Tech in the, I'm trying to think, in either the late 30s or the early 40s. And he went on to Stanford, and he ended up in Minnesota with the Laker basketball team. Jim Pollard, he was a pretty well-known basketball player. But there's several Nisei at Technical High, and we evacuated while I was at that high school in 1942. So I didn't finish high school in Oakland. Instead, I finished Topaz, Utah, for 1 year. You know, it wasn't much of a school, but we did go to school because the school started late, and we got there in September, and we graduated in June of '43, and that's when I came to Minnesota by myself at 18 years old.
Before we move forward, were there any teachers or friends that you remember from school
Well,
that
I
were special to
remember
you?
in those days they called it core, but it was social study teacher that I remember vividly, Mrs. Gerard, and she's pretty well known in Northern California, but she just passed away recently.
And what was so special about her?
Well, you can tell that she really thought a lot about the Nisei kids. You know, you can tell in different teachers, but the students really liked her, and some of my classmates, I still remember names. It was, a couple of 2 or 3 fellows became doctors. There was a San Francisco classmate that became a pediatrician in San Francisco. And
Do you
there
remember
was
his name?
yes, the one that I remember that had a big family in Berkeley is Hayashida. He ended up in Hawaii.
Oh.
I think he was a doctor. I'm not sure if he was a dentist or an MD, but Michihiko Hayashida is the name I remember. And this pediatrician in San Francisco, the name will come to me. I get lapses my age.
Don't we all?
But I'll think of it. But there's another one that really sticks in my mind because he had a tragedy in the last few years, and there was a fire in his home.
I know it's frustrating sometimes.
But there was a few doctors that were in my class, but I wasn't much of a student.